Good afternoon. Is this Chief Acevedo?
Yes, it is. How are you?
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. Chip Caldron just gave you a lovely introduction. Chip,
Oh,
do you want to
Lord.
say hello before we get started?
Welcome, Chief.
All right.
So nice to see you, and just so very proud of what you're doing in Miami, and we welcome your comments. Thank you for finding the time today.
Thank you very much. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me on. It's really an honor and a privilege to be here with everybody. I'm sorry we're falling a little behind. As you can imagine, coming into a new city, there's a lot of balls in the air right now. And the last guy that came from the outside was a guy named John Timoney, who did a great job here, but we haven't had an outsider since then. And so we've got a lot of things that we need to work on. So again, my apologies. But body worn cameras, I think it's something that is near and dear to my heart. I think as a result of the fact that we're living at a time in our nation's history where, quite frankly, a mistrust of government is at such a fever pitch high, and there's so much division in this nation in terms of our politics, in terms of something as simple as following science. And who's stuck in the middle of all this is the men and women in blue, the men and women in green, the men and women in tan that patrol our nation and provide public safety. And the truth of the matter is, at a time when, I've been a cop for 35 years, and when I became a police officer, if I said the sky is, purple, a jury would say the sky is purple. The officer says it's purple, it's purple. We were believed, we were trusted as a profession, and that simply is not the case anymore, which makes a body-worn camera, a robust camera program that much more critical. Sadly, not every agency has them, not every agency can afford them. And I like to say that, especially for big agencies across our nation, you can't afford not to have them. That's what you really can't afford, because if you don't have them and something happens, that the community is going to be thinking that we're just not committed to transparency. So in Austin, Texas, when I got there in 2007, we did not have body-worn cameras. We had in-car cameras. And one of the things that's really important, and I think that is something that folks that are thinking about starting a body-worn camera system or that have one, is to remember this. I would rather not have an in-car camera system or a body-worn camera on an officer. I would rather not have one during a critical incident if the camera is off, if we do have them, because you're better off not having one than to have one not have it on. And so early on, when I got to Austin in 2007 with in-car camera systems, and then later on, we entered into a BWC contract, but it was, as you can imagine, there was some litigation that was filed, and it was basically postponed for a while. But one of the things that we dealt with early on there, and I know that has been dealt with in some agencies, including my own in Houston, is having in-car cameras or body-worn cameras, and then a critical incident occurs and the cameras just were not on. Because you can imagine the damage it does to the credibility of our actions as it relates to the critical incident, especially if it's a use of force and a use of deadly force. And so as you start moving, whether you have a program or you're going to consider a program, you have to be very thoughtful as to when do you turn those cameras on. And some places it's depending on the call, right? And some places it depends, it's upon arrival on the call. In some places, when do you turn it off, when do you turn it on, when do you mute it? And I can tell you from my perspective, the second you're going to a call, you're better off saying, boom, turn on the camera, turn on the body worn camera, and keep it on. And I like to call it wheel to wheel. The first thing that should be seen on that camera is the wheel of the police car as the steering wheel as you're driving to the call. And the last thing that should be seen on that body worn camera is the wheel of that police car as you are leaving the hospital where the person was at, leaving the jail, and going back in service. Because if you think about coverage wheel to wheel from the beginning of the call cycle to the end of the handling the call cycle, you're definitely going to capture everything. You're going to capture the prisoner being put in the car, taken out of the car, driven to the station, driven to the jail, driven to the hospital, whatever it may be. The first thing you should see is en route to that call. In terms of self-initiated or contacts, the second an officer initiates something, obviously turn that on. Another thing that we encountered that I think is important for people to think about is, how did the officer know that camera is on? You know, how do they know that to hit the button appropriately? How do they know that it is on? And so one of the things that we adjusted in our camera system in Houston was for it to be vibrating intermittently, so you can feel the vibration, because if it just vibrates right when it goes on and it doesn't vibrate again, then the officer would have no clue that he or she didn't hit it right, or somehow it was bumped. So being able to have a system in place that will allow the officer to readily know whether or not the camera was on is really important. And also making sure that the right people have the cameras. We started in both Austin and in Houston with a focus on patrol. We know that patrol is the backbone of most agencies, and we know that a lot of our critical incidents involve patrol. So we started with patrol, on-duty patrol officers, and then we went from there and extended it to other entities, including our SWAT team. A lot of SWAT teams don't want body-worn cameras. A lot of units, when they're making entries in terms of executing search warrant, teams don't want them. And the argument was, well, they'll know our tactics. Well, I got news for you. Hollywood shows our tactics every day. They're not rocket science, right? If you think about Osama bin Laden and the raid on Osama bin Laden, we got to see a lot of the things from SEAL Team 6 that went on with that raid. And so that's not a good argument. And so the interesting thing about putting them on your specialized weapons teams is that once I put them on my folks in Houston, the same guys that didn't want them started singing their praises. Because think about it. First of all, our officers, when we wear body-worn cameras, what we're capturing more often than not is officers doing the right things, the right ways for the right reason. Because I think most of us know that most police officers are honorable, dedicated, well-trained professionals. And despite the fact that the media will focus on the times we get it wrong, we all know on this call and in this conference that the vast majority of the times officers are doing the right thing. So guess what? Why those SWAT personnel loved the cameras in hindsight? Because when it came to that critical incident debriefing, you all know that they do that debriefing at the end of every SWAT call out. They were spotting things and noticing things that, from a tactical perspective, that were lessons learned that they would have never learned but for having those cameras on. And so we actually have some great support in Houston, and now here in Miami. We are kind of in our infancy. We're getting more cameras to extend the program to everyone that's carrying the gun when they're out there doing warrants, when they're doing patrol, when they're executing warrants, and when they're out and about in the public. Another area that's really important to consider, because if an officer's in uniform, whether or not it's their primary employment or their secondary off-duty employment that in many states they're allowed to do, is you've got to have them on when they're acting in their capacity, whether it's for a bar, a restaurant, a hospital. You've got to have a robust program for off-duty or secondary employment activity. Because unfortunately, if you have them for on duty, and then you let your officers wear these uniforms, provide police services, provide security off duty, the public's not going to distinguish when there's a deadly force encounter, whether it was a secondary employment or primary employment. The truth of the matter is, if they're acting in their peace officer capacity, especially in their uniform capacity, which in a lot of places in this country, they're allowed, I would urge you to make sure that the same policies and procedures apply, especially at bars. When you look at across the country right now, at bar closing, it seems that we're having more and more shootings at these bars, at these nightclubs. And we can debate whether we should have officers there in the first place or not. It seems like we're having more conflict at these off-duty gigs. So it's important that we actually have a body-worn camera program, if you have one, that does not distinguish between primary employment and secondary employment, if they in fact are being allowed to utilize our uniform, our equipment, what we market ourselves as in their secondary employment capacity, because it will come back. I promise you, will come back to bite you. Another thing that I think is really important for execution of search warrants, do not wait, as you all know, that we drive right up to the target house. Do not wait until they get to the target house and start exiting the vehicle to turn on the body-worn camera, because we had something called the Harding Street fiasco in Houston during the execution of a narcotics warrant by our street narcotics folks, where the patrol officers that rode in the vans and the cars to support and help secure the exterior of the location did not turn on their cameras because it was a search warrant execution, not a call for service, until they got out of the car. And guess what? We lost the sound, the audio, which would have been very critical with the knock and announce to have from their body-worn camera. So that's something really, really important. Now, from the major city chief's perspective, and one of the things that was really irking us as an organization, to the extent that some of our agencies pulled out of task forces, was the fact that our federal partners were not allowing our task force officers to wear body-worn cameras when they're executing search and arrest warrants on task forces. Now, I'm not going to go into their thinking, but we all know that sometimes our federal partners, they're great partners, but sometimes it's more of a mindset of do as we say and not as we do mindset. And I can just tell you that after about 2.5 years, close to 3 years of really pushing, last year we were able to do a pilot program, and I will give the old Attorney General under President Trump a lot of credit. The second he got into office, he moved very quickly to get these MOUs on some test cities across the nation for body-worn camera programs for task force officers. And we were able to actually get it so we can actually have body-worn cameras on our task force officers from the state, county, and municipal level as they participated on task forces. And we actually entered those MOUs. And again, I've got to give the last Attorney General credit for making that a priority. Now I'll give even more credit to this current Department of Justice that recently announced that the justice law enforcement agencies are going to be required to have body-worn cameras. And I think that's very important, especially during the execution of search warrants and the execution of arrest warrants, because we had an incident in Houston where we had a individual kidnapped for ransom, and our local FBI SWAT team went to execute a search warrant in the city of Houston. And to make a long story short, the actual victim, the actual kidnapping victim that was gagged and bound, was actually shot and killed during the execution of the warrant by an FBI agent. Very tragic situation. The bigger tragedy was that we as a police department investigated it, probably not, didn't bring the greatest of joy to our FBI partners, but we insisted on investigating it because it happened in our city. And we conducted our own criminal investigation, and we came to a conclusion that the way that it occurred, as described by the shooter, that the physical evidence did not support it. So again, had they had body worn cameras during the execution of that rescue attempt, they would have been in a better place, and so would we. So again, if your people are going to be participating in any kind of activity, that there's an expectation of your folks wearing body worn cameras. If it were not a task force, I would highly recommend that you do what many of us in the major city chiefs did, which was to tell our partners we're either going to wear them as if they were operating in a strictly municipal strike team or arrest team or warrant execution team, regardless of who's on there. And we're going to follow our own personal policy, our own departmental policy, because our community, the closer we are to the community in terms of state, county, and municipal agencies, we know that our community is going to hold us accountable for our policy. They don't care whether you're in a task force or not. So that's something I think that's really important. And the last thing that I want to bring up, because I would like to make this interactive if we can. I'm not sure if we can in this format, but I think is really important, is to understand that the second that you get your first generational cameras, you need to start thinking about how we're going to get the next generational cameras, because you're looking at probably a 3 on the low end, but 5-year on the high end in terms of having to replace and refresh your technology, refresh your cameras, and then obviously the data storage. I would highly recommend a cloud approach for a myriad of reasons, if you can. And I would also urge you that if you're going to start a program, to get together with all the county agency, the prosecutor in your county, and as many of your agencies, to see if you can leverage your purchasing power, but leverage your regional relationship so you can have the same system. And then if it's a cloud system, in terms of being able to process and move the video evidence around, if you can have a system where the DA can grab it themselves, where you can put it in that system with the evidence management system, that's something that I would highly recommend that you consider. And the more automated the system, and the more agencies and entities from the criminal justice system that can access the system, the better off you will be. Because one of the things that will happen is, in the world of public records requests, get ready if you get these things, because that's going to be a huge part of the equation, is the volume of public records requests that come in, and the volume of information has to be given to your prosecutor, and then from the prosecutor to the defense bar, it is astronomical, the terms of the amount of data that you have to move around. So if you can have a regional approach to the procurement process, where records management systems that can handle it and people can move things around, the better off you will be, because none of us live on an island, and a lot of people need to touch the same video, access the same video, because our biggest challenge has been backlogs of information, of the sharing of the data with the prosecutors. And quite honestly, prosecutors will point the fingers at the cops, and the cops will point the fingers at the prosecutors. At the end of the day, it's a joint responsibility. So having everyone come together in the procurement process, even if you haven't done it with your current generation of system, as you refresh and move into your next gen, that's something I would highly recommend that you do. And so with that, I'm going to is there a way to open this up to questions for everybody, or no?
Yes, so
I don't think there's any value in anything I said, but those are just some of the things off the shelf here that I've encountered. Oh, last thing that I forgot. Also consider triggers, automatic triggers. I haven't been able to accomplish that, and I didn't get done in Houston because I inherited the system there, and Austin I had left. But again, I'd rather not have a body-worn camera system during a critical incident than to have one and then not have the camera on when something happens, because I think that you're in a bad spot. And from a policy perspective, make sure that you have a disciplinary matrix to make the rules of engagement very clear to the officers, that makes them know what the consequences are to not have the camera on when they should have. And quite honestly, when a cop turns a corner, if you don't have an automated system on that automatically turns them on when with the triggers, when the doors open, that it actually will turn on the cameras within a certain range of that car. You've got to have a policy that makes it real clear what the consequences are, because if you don't, there are going to be people that if you let them, they're not going to have the cameras on. But if you have an automated trigger system and the cops turn that corner and there's a shooting going down, I'd rather have a system where the officer can focus on dealing with the threat than trying to fumble through trying to find that button. Because you all know in the world that we live in right now, with active shooters, mass shootings going through the roof, gun violence going through the roof, officer safety is really important. I like the idea of having automated triggers so the officers, when they open that door and they come out, there's no chance of the system not being on. And lastly, in Harris County, we have a situation where we don't book anybody. We actually have to call the DA's intake, and our officers run the information by the DA. And one of the areas that before I left, we had not cleared, the DA was insisting that we mute the call for the conversation that was going on. And we were insisting we didn't want to mute the call. So the muting policies are really another area that you have to pay close attention to, because every time you mute in the eyes of the public, what you're doing is hiding stuff. It's kind of like when you tell the media no comment. No comment is translated by distrusting public as they're hiding something. Well, when you mute, you got to be real thoughtful in terms of your muting policy, because what the public will translate that as is you're hiding something. And a lot of organizations will use tactics, overuse tactics in terms of trying to mute, which is something you should do, I believe, sparingly. And so with that, is there any questions or anything that I can ask, or is there an opportunity for questions or just further discussion?
So we have
Yes,
not
we did.
received, yep. We have not received any questions from participants, but Chief, could you talk about how body-worn cameras have factored into after-action reviews of critical incidents?
Yeah, absolutely. Look, those body-worn cameras and the review of those cameras, let me just say, it's from a leadership perspective, it has helped us in terms of assessing our tactics. It has helped us in terms of assessing our training. It has helped us in terms of assessing our policies, our procedures. They have been a godsend. And I'll never forget when I was a young sergeant in East Los Angeles with the California Highway Patrol, we had this show called Real Stories with the Highway Patrol that was kind of like a cops for state police agencies. And I remember none of my cops wanted the camera with them. And I remember going in the roll call and I said, listen, that camera, you should be welcoming that camera, because that camera should be your best friend. It should be recording you, that camera crew, doing the right things, saying the right things, and acting appropriately. Because let's face it, the haters, like these cop block people, they try to take video, and then what they do is that they edit the heck out of it. So they all notice that those cop block kind of people only show the police reaction to and response to someone's actions. They never seem to show, more often than not, they don't show what led to the takedown, what led to the slam down, right? They only show half the picture. So these cameras have provided us with an opportunity to address training, address policy, from the auditing perspective. You know, for all the critics in the world that say the police can't police themselves, they keep ignoring the fact that most of our complaints that are actionable are internal, right? And quite honestly, I can't begin to tell you how many issues we have identified in Houston and now here in Miami, especially as the new chief. Trust me, we're identifying issues. So especially on some of our response to resistance issues from our audit mechanism, where you go out and you audit a certain number of your officers every month and their videos. We've been able to, again, address not just training, address not just tactics, address not just policies and procedures, but also address malfeasance from our officers. And more often than not, for those that would think it's sergeant in a box, I guess you can say, with that little camera, I can't begin to, I don't think I can oversell how many complaints come in that we have actually, more often than not, we have actually saved officers. These cameras have saved officers from false complaints. More often they help officers than they hurt officers, because I think at the end of the day, officers more often than not are doing the right thing. And they kept suspects in check. When the officer points out, hey, just so you know, you're being recorded by a body-worn camera, a lot of times it will put that individual in check, and they act a little bit more in accordance with decency than they would have without that camera. Or how many times someone would come in to complain and the sergeant would say, oh yeah, we happen to have the whole incident captured in body-worn camera. Let me review it. Do you still have a complaint? Oh, actually, no, I don't have a complaint, and they leave. So it is a win-win all the way around.
Thank you, Chief. And we received a couple more questions, but I think we have time for one more.
Yeah.
And that is, how much discretion are officers in your agency allowed in regards to recording?
No, there's not. Look, if you give discretion, then look, if you give too much discretion in terms of recording, the problem's going to be is that it only takes one person not following, not exercising good discretion, and we end up in a situation where there's a deadly force, and then somebody else captures it. Just imagine George Floyd, if the officers had turned off their cameras or didn't have them on, and then those bystanders released that video, right? As angry as people were when we all came out, imagine how much anger they would be. So we try to limit the discretion. We try to make the rules of engagement very clear. We try to make the consequences clear. Then we try to be very consistent in enforcing that. And the other thing is, we were using these little plastic ones, these little plastic holders. They don't work. The camera will fall off 9 times out of 10. So the heavier duty ones with the really tight magnets that go right here is what I would recommend. If somebody actually put that, M. Garland put that to everyone, that can be an issue. So make sure you got the right retention, because that is an issue. And by the way, my email address is art.acevedo @miami-police.org, art.acevedo @miami-police.org. If anybody needs anything, please reach out. We'll be happy to help you out.
Thank you so much, Chief. We really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today.
You're welcome. All have a great day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.